Hello and welcome to Cairns Catches Up. Tom Cairns, your host, where I speak to guests within the motorsport world about their careers, the challenges they have to face, what the futures lie ahead of them, and perhaps the advice they can share on young hopefuls who are wanting to get a career within motorsport. Now, today's guest is someone who you may know as someone who makes the announcements for Formula One podiums. He's known as Champagne Bob. He's been around within the motorsport world for over 50 years. It's Mr. Bob Constanduros. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, if it is afternoon wherever you are, or morning wherever you are.
Yeah,
Hi,
absolutely. Yeah. You never know whereabouts in the world people are. So sometimes I'd
absolutely.
say morning, afternoon, and evening, however you want to put it. How are you anyway? It hasn't been too long since you were over in Abu Dhabi for the season finale of Formula One, where McLaren won their first Constructors' Championship for 26 years. How has the Christmas period treated you?
Very good, very good. I had my co-commentator and son, Ben, with me for a while. He was here with his family, and now we're sort of looking forward to going into the new season. I follow one other sport really, really closely, and that's alpine skiing, which of course is on at the moment. So I'm happily watching alpine skiing on Eurosport mainly, although it gets very much interrupted by the Australian Open, which is very annoying at this time of year.
Absolutely. And I love skiing actually, thinking of it. I mean, I think back to the days where I used to go on school trips to Italy, going to places like Courmayeur or La Tuile or Pila, that
Yeah,
is located in those particular areas of
how they all
Europe.
start.
Oh,
Mm.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those were the days for me when I was a teenager. Going on to today's show, this is very much about you, Bob. You've had quite a long career, as a journalist, as a commentator, someone who conducts the interviews, the person who's at the FIA press conferences for Formula One as well. Take me back to where it all began for you, because I think you were a journalist for Autosport, initially as a freelancer before you became full time for about 5 years before going back into freelance. Did it did the motorsport wisdom begin from your parents at all, or from your ancestors, let's say?
Yeah, we actually had to go back before the Second World War, in fact, way back to my father and his cousin, James Tilling, who was also a commentator. My father wasn't a commentator, but the two of them had singers, 2.5 liter, I think. There's a picture of one on the wall just up there. And So they raced and competed a little bit. And then after the Second World War, my father by then had a family, so he couldn't compete. He was actually offered a drive in a Talbot Lago by a local guy, but he turned it down because he had a family. But Uncle James, as he became known, Uncle James, James Tilling, was a regular commentator at Goodwood, and my father used to help him at Goodwood. We lived very close to Goodwood. I was born probably within earshot of Goodwood at a little village called Bury, and then moved to another village called Fittleworth, which isn't very far away from where I'm sitting now. But that was the start of it. And when I was at school, for example, I was at boarding school. My letters from my father were read like race reports. It was all about who had won which race and everything like that. And then I went through university in France, and then did my first freelance work when I met Simon Taylor of Autosport. Now, Simon Taylor went on to be managing director of Haymarket Publishing, but at that time he was working for Autosport. He was the publisher, I think. Even then, he had been editor. And Simon, I met him at a drinks party, I think, or at a party. Um, I think he fancied my girlfriend, so I used to go with him to various races. He was racing in Clubman's, and I went into freelance for Autosport in the late 60s. Um, and that's when I started my career doing freelances. I used to go to race meetings, not quite all over the country, but in the southern part of the country. It could be Liddon Hill, it could be Llandau, it could be Castle Combe, certainly Silverstone, certainly Snetterton, I think even Cadwell Park as well. So I went to those club race meetings and reported them for Autosport. And it was convenient because I lived in London, and literally round the corner, the club editor at the time, a chap called Robert Furnell, lived with the rallies editor, who was John Davenport. They lived literally round the corner. So I could come back from a race meeting, sit in my flat, type out the race report, walk round the corner, and it was delivered even before midnight on a Sunday night. So that was quite convenient. Then I was asked to join Autosport in 1971, and I submitted my CV, if you like. I didn't get the job, but the guy who did get the job left a year later. And so that's when I joined Autosport in 1972. And I stayed with them for 5 years. And that was a great time. Ian Phillips, who is still a great friend, was the editor. We had all sorts of people. Paddy McNally, actually, initially, he went on to run the all sport management and the hospitality side of Formula One. He was our Grand Prix editor. Pete Lyons then took over from him, a legendary editor in when it comes to Formula One. We also had Chris Whitty, of course, who was recently co-authored with Ian and I and a couple of others a book about Formula Two. Absolutely a Bible about Formula Two. It's about that thick, somewhere around here somewhere. Who else? Robert Fernell was there as well. So there were a fantastic number of people. David Winter was the photographer. They're still all great friends of mine, those who are still with us. Peter Newton was the rallies editor. Ian Sadler worked with him. It was a great atmosphere. We worked hard, but we played hard. Ian Phillips made sure we played hard. Anyone who knows Ian, who went on to become the team chief of Leighton House March, knows very well what he's like. We worked hard and played hard. And then in 1972, when Quentin Spurring now was 78, when Quentin Spurring was now editor, or 77, he was now editor of Autosport. I left because somebody had to cover the European Touring Car Championship because the Jaguars were racing in the Touring Car Championship. So somebody had to cover them. And I decided to go freelance. And in fact, I always say when I'm at FOM, Formula One management place in Biggin Hill, I always say I haven't actually been in an office environment since 1977 when I left Autosport. So that is up until the moment I'm a freelance journalist. I bought a VW camper. Jeff Hutchinson had a VW camper. He was a legendary freelance journalist, and he would go to races in his orange VW. I had a blue VW, and I set off to go to the Nürburgring, and then I went to Imola, and then I went to Vallelunga, and I would go all over Europe. I didn't really go into Iberia, the Iberian Peninsula, but France, Italy. I once took it to Sicily on a ferry. I went all over Europe in the VW camper, race to race to race. Sometimes it was Formula One, sometimes Formula Two, sometimes sports cars, sometimes touring cars, occasionally even Formula Three as well. So it was a very peripatetic life, if you like. I learnt, actually, one of the weird things that I learned was to live with myself. I was quite happy with my own company. So that's the start of it.
You mentioned Simon Taylor in there. Now, for those of you who don't know who Simon Taylor is, he's currently a historian of Formula One, and he is known also for voicing in the official Formula One season reviews in the 1980s and in the 1980s and 90s. Those were the words I was trying to get out there. But what is he like to work with, or what was he like to work with back in those days, Bob? Because he seems very subtle when he speaks to people. He seems like the friendly kind of chap that you just, I don't know, meet in a pub and have a good old laugh or something like that.
Well, we did. That's what we did. He used to race, as I say, he had a clubman's car called an RLR, which had something to do with Robertson's Marmalade. I think it was built by somebody from Robertson or something like that. Um, and I used to go with him. I was completely useless as a mechanic. I was quite good at polishing the car. That was about it. And Simon got on really well with him and still do. We still exchange emails. And of course, he's a fantastic historian, as you say. And it's all up there. You know, he's got a big hard drive up there, and it's all up there, and he remembers so much, and he's got so many good contacts. He's getting on a bit now. He's the wrong side of 80, but he only turned 80 last summer, and I saw him last summer along with Chris Whitty, Ian Phillips, all that lot, Mike Dudson, Andrew Marriott, etc., and Quentin as well. And really, Simon had employed us all virtually, and he was the big daddy of motorsport, if you like. And he joined as probably an editorial assistant straight from Cambridge to Autosport, became the editor of Autosport, became the publisher of Autosport, and became the managing director of Haymarket Publishing. So he's a success story, and he's still got great cars as well. He drives a Porsche on the road. He's got the beloved stove-built Special, which used to be an HWM. He used to have a Porsche 928. I think he's still got his Chevrolet Corvette as well. And he's got a Derby Bentley, which he loves as well, a 3.5-litre Derby Bentley from the 1930s. So he's still very much an enthusiast. He lives in Chiswick. He's got a garage full of publications. And I've never been there, but I know he's got this garage, and he's just worried what happens to it all when he's gone. And he's already instructed his wife, Pearl, that she should just get a big skip outside the house, and it'll all go in there. Not all of it, but a lot of the magazines. He's collected every magazine and I think program from every race and the results from every race as well. And that's what us historians, old people, get a bit nutty about. You know, I've got 3 shelves of autocourses there, nothing but autocourse, 3 shelves. I've got an attic out of the back, which has got loads and loads of books in it. We've got all this stuff. And somehow we have to get rid of it as well.
Mm-hmm. And when I decide to get Simon Taylor on the show, I will have to ask him about those garage load of publications and books and all that. That sounds very, very intriguing, and obviously it goes back a long way. Go on,
Tom. It must be occupying so much valuable, if you like, property, a potential building space in Chiswick. I mean, Chiswick is not cheap, and here is this garage, which is just a storeroom basically, and he could probably sell it for, I don't know, £1 million and put a house on
it. Crazy. I will have to speak to him about that one day.
Yeah.
Going back to you, how difficult was it for you to find your feet within the motorsport community to lead you to where you are now? Because back in those days, we obviously didn't have social media platforms. I don't think we had email back in those days. Was it more like the fax machine, or did you have to like send it through the mail? Did you have to turn up to someone else's property to send your CV off? How did it all have to work for you back in those days, maybe in the 1960s? Okay.
So most of it was people used to send either telephone their reports if they were national newspapers, or telex them. And you probably never heard of a telex, but a telex was literally you sat down, you wrote it, and it came out a long, thin piece of paper, right, with dots in it. And then you fed that into a sending machine, and that's sent to another telex wherever you wanted to send it. And that's how you used to send it. Or you typed it out and then literally sent somebody, and maybe some film as well. So, for example, if I was at a touring car race at the Nürburgring, I'd try and finish my report, which was probably only 300 or 400 words long, not very long. I'd try and finish my report, put it in an envelope with a film, because I also took pictures in those days, not very good pictures, but I took pictures, and put it in an envelope, rush and find a driver who was flying to London, and then get somebody to meet him in London to pick up that envelope. And that's the way it used to be done. Or if it was in the UK, those race reports that I was telling you about earlier on, the clubbies, club race reports, they'd send it by train, say from Edinburgh or from, I don't know, Manchester or Newcastle. They'd send it down by train. So that's how the communication worked. The big problem for all of us in Formula One in those days was a chap called Franco Lini, who at one point, for I think only one season, became team manager at Ferrari. But Franco Lini worked for a magazine called Autosprint, and I worked for Autosprint as well for quite some time. And he worked for Autosprint, and he would sit on the telex machine for hours on end, and nobody else could get on the telex machine. They all wanted to send their stuff. So you'd have to have 4 or 5 telex machines, but Franco Lini would be on one of them. And we all knew him very, very well. And of course, you built up fantastic contacts. So I was working for L'Equipe. I was working for in France. I was working for Auto Hebdo in France as well. I was working for Autosprint in Italy. I was working for Automobile Review in Switzerland. In Germany, Rally Racing, I worked for them. So you were working for the big network of magazines. Also Autosport in Japan as well. Corsa in Argentina. You were working for this network of magazines. So you had probably 8 or 9, maybe 10 magazines that you were sending possibly the same report to, the same prints, if you like. In the States, did I work for On Track? I think I worked for On Track for a while. So you were sending all this stuff all over the world, either by post for a monthly magazine or, as I mentioned, by telex. But you were then, of course, in came the fax. That made things a lot easier as well. And then, of course, obviously, internet, etc. But in those early days, yes, it was kind of difficult to get your reports out. And then I started to get Bernie Eccleston. You're probably going to ask me this question in a moment, but Bernie Eccleston asked me to take over the circuit commentary in about 1985. And he said he didn't like the way the guy who was doing it at the time was financing himself. Now, that was a chap called Anthony Marsh. And Anthony Marsh, the way he was financing it was he would go to Champion spark plugs and say, will you pay me to mention your spark plugs all the time on the commentary? And they would say yes. And so that would help his, and maybe Goodyear Tires and maybe Ford Motor Company, who else? Various people. So that's the way he got his money together in order to cover the race meetings. Bernie didn't like that. So Bernie came up with a solution for me in about 1984-85 and said, I want you to do the commentary. He'd heard that I'd done the commentary at Le Mans, and they liked that. Alec de Vries-Whittaker told him about my commentary at Le Mans. And that's why he got me in. I went up to Chessington for an interview, and it lasted about 5 minutes. He said, I want you to do this. I want you to take over. So I did. I did the circuit commentary. That is to say, not on TV, not on radio, just on the circuit. And I did that from 1985 onwards. And I didn't miss a race until I had a heart operation in about 2017. So I did over 30 years uninterrupted Formula One races. And gradually other things began to wind down. I used to do less and less Formula 2, Formula 3000 as it became. I did less and less touring cars. I did less and less sports cars as well, because obviously Formula One was really, really busy. And that's how that started up. And that led to working for FOM, Formula One Management as we now know it. It was called Foca TV, and it was run by a chap called Chris Davis. And Chris Davis was a biggish guy. And he had a couple of cameramen, Ollie Parnham and Giampiero Augusti, who is an Italian who still works for FOM. Even these days, he actually does alpine skiing as well. So he does 2 things that I love. And then there was Tony Jardine as well. And when we used to do our summaries on, say, a Wednesday, Chris Davis would sit in the middle. I would be one side of him. Tony Jardine would be the other side. And that's how we would record those summaries that you probably have deep in the archive somewhere at FOM.
Yeah,
And that's how Poker TV started. It was only about four of us.
yeah. I'm looking behind me as well on the shelf somewhere. You won't be. I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but on the bottom shelf down there, I got the season review DVDs, which you'll have been involved in some of them, which Chris Davis, as you mentioned, was involved in the production for those season reviews in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, he was the big boss. He was a great guy. I think he lives in France now. If he's still with us, hopefully he is. But he lives in France. And Chris Davis, he was the big guy who he was the boss of it all, and he was the start of that extraordinary empire that you and I both worked for at FOM at Biggin Hill.
Lovely. I mean, I'm so privileged to be getting the work which Chris Davis had been involved in, and I think a
Mm.
few of them actually I have on VHS as well. They're not the ones in the 90s, which I'm happy to have in my home somewhere. Um, so many races you've done. The first one you did, I think you said that it was the German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring in 1985. You did the podium announcement for, if I remember correctly, the race that was won by Michele Alboreto, Bob. But through all the races that you've done the podium announcements for, which did you find were the best races for you to make the podium announcements for, and which ones would you say were not so good compared to those?
Well, the best races, difficult to say. Um, I, I'll start with the worst. I remember I was very upset at the team orders of Ferrari at the Austrian Grand Prix when Rubens Barrichello was told to pull over for Michael Schumacher. I was very upset. You probably remember which date it is. That's
Yeah,
you're going to have to prompt me
it
on
was
all
two,
the dates.
yeah, it was 2002
That's
in
it.
Austria.
Well,
Yeah,
I was upset with that. I was annoyed. You know, that was messing around with the order of things, and I didn't enjoy that. That was one thing, obviously, and obviously 1994 at Imola. That was obviously a very emotional moment as well. We didn't really know at that stage when the podium was announced, we didn't know what had happened to Ayrton. We didn't know that he had perished in the accident. There were rumors. I think I was told it's not good or something like that, but didn't know the actual details. And actually, of course, at that instance, we had to go on the podium and we had to do the podium, whatever had happened. Okay, a somber tone, not a joyful tone, but a somber tone, just to announce and say exactly what had happened. The greatest race, it's difficult to say. Out of I think it's about 750. I can't remember them all, amazingly enough. The hard drive doesn't really record them all. And they're deep in there. There are some races where, obviously, I'll tell you which, of course, 1993 Donington. That was just a great race, and I was on the podium. And actually, somewhere in the FOM archive, there's me talking to Ayrton before he goes on the podium, and I just sort of said that was fantastic. What a brilliant race! You can see me talking to him on the podium. It was a brilliant race. That it was an extraordinary weekend, extraordinary day. Even I'd had to do a presentation for a company at the airport, at East Midlands Airport, and James Hunt was doing it with me. And the two of us yomped, because that was a very fashionable word at the time, yomped across sort of Heathland and the outskirts of the airport, etc., because somebody was meant to pick us up and they didn't. So we had to run to the airport to do this presentation and then run back again. I nearly had a collision with Princess Diana on the spiral staircase in the Donington Tower because I was rushing up the stairs, watching my feet, and she was coming down, and all of a sudden there she was right in front of me. I nearly made a big faux pas about Jordan's King Hussein. I nearly called him somebody else who I won't mention. Um, and I was going on holiday the next day, and I was worried about getting my camper out of the car park because if you remember, it was a soaking wet day. And I was really worried that I wasn't going to be able to get the car out of the car park. It had to go up a steep hill, but I managed to do that. My camper, in fact, my subsequent camper, that was a white one. Um, so yes, it was a very memorable day, and that race absolutely so memorable with Ayrton, taking the lead on the first lap, 5 pit stops. Rubens Barrichello also drove a great race that weekend as well. So that was probably the most joyful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, I've also presided over, one or two faux pas. Nigel Mansell cutting his fingers on the trophy at Imola as well.
I think it was Hikaru Pagua, wasn't it, where he won for Ferrari? I think that's where he had his hand lacerated on the
Yeah, that's
podium.
right. Yeah.
I think it was Hikaru Pagua in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
Yakura Pagua also, Nelson Piquet fainting and having to be supported by Keke and somebody else. He nearly fainted. He went all a little bit sort of. Um, but yeah, there's a few memorable ones, quite interesting ones from the podium point of view. Also, of course, there was the big political one, which I didn't appreciate at the time, but in Turkey, when they introduced somebody from Cyprus who wasn't really meant to be on there, and of course, Max Mosley was well aware who it was and was absolutely furious that they'd introduced him. He was also furious after the 1997 European Grand Prix at Jerez. And everyone remembers that race because of the collision between Villeneuve and Schumacher. Everyone remembers that. But actually, there was another thing. Max Mosley said at the time, the mayor of Jerez went onto the podium, and he shouldn't have been on the podium. And I always remember Max Mosley shouting at the mayor, saying, "We will never, ever come here again. You should not have been on the podium. We will never come here again." And sure enough, we never went there again for a Grand Prix.
Yeah, I was going to mention that particular race as well, which you mentioned about the mayor of Jerez being on the podium when he wasn't supposed to be there, and yeah, that proved to be Jerez's last race in Formula One. But of course, times have changed within FOM. Max Mosley was the FIA president at the time. Now it's Mohammed Ben Sulayem in charge of that particular group. You mentioned the San Marino Grand Prix in 1994 at Imola, a huge turning point in the sport's history. You mentioned about how somber the atmosphere was, but what was it really like that weekend? Because not only did we see the passing of Ayrton Senna, but the day before we had Roland Ratzenberger killed in an accident. And I cannot begin to think what it must have felt like, because the younger demographic will feel about what had happened to Jules Bianchi. They'll feel about what happened to Antoine Hubert in that Formula 2 race at Spa. But to lose 2 drivers on the same weekend in the same sport, what must it have been like at the time for you?
It was a slightly different era in that, for example, we had lost other drivers. We lost Stefan Beloff, of course, in a sports car race at Spa. There were other drivers who had been killed in other categories, if you like, in Formula 2. Hans-Georg Berger died in Formula 2 as well, admittedly 10 years before that, probably. But you're absolutely right. It was, in terms of Formula 1, it was such a weekend. And it had started with Rubens Barrichello having a big accident on the Friday. And people perhaps forget that. And it continued with a start line incident in the Grand Prix itself before Ayrton's accident, and then also a loose wheel in the pits as well. I think that was Michele Alboreto again.
It was,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, in the pits. So you just thought everything's coming all at once. It's just it's brain overload. Yeah, I mean, it was immensely sad, and I always remember the last thing Ayrton ever said to me. I with FOM, I was waiting at the Williams motorhome door on the Sunday morning warm up, and I was waiting, hoping to get an interview with him. And he came out of the door and he said, "You don't think I'm going to talk to you, do you?" And that was it. That was the last words he ever said to me, because he was just so affected, and I think all the drivers were massively affected. And looking back, it was something even when dare one say it, in the 60s, in the 70s, when there were so many um, fatalities. If you look back, um, it affected drivers so hugely then as well. It never became commonplace, even though it almost was, but it still was massively affecting for all drivers. It said on the back of your ticket, motor racing is dangerous. Having said that, it was still a horrible shock, and people perished in all sorts of races, in club races, for all sorts of different reasons. And it is a dangerous sport, and it was a much more dangerous sport then. And we thought it was less dangerous when we got to the 90s. We hadn't had fatalities, and then of course that one weekend, which was just hugely shocking. But everyone got on with their job, everyone had to get on with their job. I remember I rang up, I was working for the Glasgow Herald at the time, and I rang them and they said, "Don't worry, we'll handle it, we'll look after it, we'll do it." So I didn't actually have to write a race report. And I also remember that the best account of that race weekend was a chap called Stan Peacher, who was working for The Sun. And he wouldn't have expected The Sun to have written a well-balanced report, but his was the best.
Excellent. I mean, I think of Imola 94. I wasn't even born back in Imola 94, so I wouldn't have been able to have witnessed what had happened. But for those who are old enough to remember what had happened, you just couldn't begin to think. I even remember what had happened to Antoine Hubert at Spa in 2019. I just, I that was literally the only thing that I was thinking about when I was sleeping, heading into the Sunday, where everyone at Spa was just in mourning over him. But everyone except Formula 2, because Formula 2 had abandoned their sprint race on the Sunday morning because of Antoine's passing. And so, as a mark of respect, they chose not to race. But Formula 3 and Formula 1 still got on with their jobs. It's the same today. The show must go on. Would drivers like Antoine Hubert or Ayrton Senna or Roland Ratzenberger, would they want everyone to stop racing because of it? I don't think they would.
I don't think they would. No, no. It's a passion. It's a passion that they indulged in, and they didn't want to lose it. Yeah.
More on the topic of Formula One, Bob. How do you assess where Formula One is now compared to maybe when you first started at Autosport in the 60s? Because from what I've been told, like what Formula One was like in around those days in the 60s, it used to be a rather more gentlemanly type affair between the drivers. They usually go out and compete, and by the time everything is done, they have a good old drink and they go on the plane back home in peace. Whereas now in Formula One, you don't necessarily see that, do you?
No, I think things have changed a lot, and they also changed because of COVID as well. From my point of view, as a member of the media, I see a lot less of the drivers. I don't necessarily know them that well. Once upon a time, I knew everybody. I worked with them. Okay, I'm a bit older now. I've got this stuff which has gone a bit grey. I'm a bit older, so I don't necessarily get the same jobs. But once upon a time, I would be working. I probably worked for every single Formula One team at some stage in some form or other. I would perhaps do paddock club stuff or various things, presentations, etc. COVID sort of put an end to that, and also it could put an end to the social side of Formula One as well. You used to be able to go and have lunch with a team, and talk about the team as a whole, how things were going with the PR people. Some of the press people, I have no idea who they are. They don't come and introduce themselves. They don't, even though I'm at all the Grand Prix, or not all of them these days. I go to about half of them these days, but I don't know a lot of those people, and they change as well. You might have somebody who come to maybe just 5 Grand Prix, and he is part of the press, part of the press staff, press office of a Grand Prix team, but he only comes to 5 Grand Prix, so he's not going to make that many contacts during that time. And actually, they sort of limit it. They perhaps want to have contacts with, say, Sky, with BBC, with Autosport, and that's it. They don't care about anybody else. The fact that I'm talking away on the microphone to the crowd, to the people, they don't make an effort. They don't bother. So it has, in that way, it's a lot less social. It used to be very, very social. We'd all have lunch together at the Elf motorhome years and years ago. You wanted to be a member of IRPA, the International Racing Press Association, because that would help with your credentials. Then FIA took the credential side of things away, and FOM to some extent the same thing. So it did very much change. It's very, very different these days. And of course, it's a massive, massive business. It has what, 750 million fans, according to FOM themselves in a press release last week. 750 million fans. It's huge, but it's more competitive than ever. It really is incredibly competitive when you've got the whole field sometimes covered by 1 second in a session. 1 second, admittedly around a short circuit, perhaps like Interlagos. But it is so competitive, and it's more competitive, I think, than it's ever been before. It's more technologically advanced. The technology in there, sadly, we don't see it. We don't know what it's all about. They try and explain, some of the teams try and explain, but it is so technologically advanced. It is also business advanced as well. It's so B2B, for example, is happening all the time. The sponsors are involved. All sorts of sponsors come in. As a media person, I get probably 2 or 3 press releases per week about new sponsors coming in. It's huge. It's massive. Obviously, from a fan point of view, the merchandising is huge as well. It's more popular. There are more Grand Prix, of course, 24 Grand Prix, and it's more competitive. So it's a big success story. It really is a massive success story, and well done to those who have played their part in it, which I suppose I have.
You look at the competitiveness, as you've rightly mentioned. People say, or some people say, oh, well, Formula One was Formula One those days. Today's is not like what it is. But when you look back at it carefully, let's say in the 80s and the 90s, the coverage of the events weren't quite as advanced as what it is now. They didn't have timing towers there then. You would be lucky enough to see the current classification of the top 6 in the race. You don't really see too much of the other competitors apart from the top runners, because people's eyes were very much on Senna, Prost, Mansell, Piquet. And you'd be lucky enough to even see an underdog in there like Ivan Capelli or Maurizio Gugelmin, or someone like, I don't know, Gerhard Berger, let's say, the underdog. We look at it now, and you would often see some of the drivers from the midfield or towards the back, if there is one now, given how competitive Formula One is these days, to even watch them on a flying lap during free practice. Back in those days, in the 80s and 90s, you didn't quite have that.
Everybody gets a fair crack of the whip. They have to. because one, they're paying for it, and two, um, they deserve it as well. It is so competitive, and I really think we are at the peak of competition. A lot of people would say, "Oh, the racing was so much better in the 50s and 60s." Yeah, maybe between two cars, and you only need two cars for a race. But what about the rest of them? They were all tailing off at the back. They were laps behind. And it wasn't necessarily that competitive throughout the field. Now it is competitive throughout the field. It's phenomenal. And the cars are so reliable. You know, we'll get 22 cars finishing, sorry, 20 cars finishing a race, all 20 cars on several occasions during a year. Fantastic. You'd say that in 2007, say, and say, we're going to have everybody finishing. No, 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 no chance. Absolutely no chance. You know, the reliability of this, it's just impossible. They would say that. It's happened.
Yeah.
But basically, the regulations, the FIA has said, you will do this. Oh, okay. And they've done it.
Even though they turn around and say, no, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to finish that many races. But they
Yeah.
did because they knew they were going to. It's
Yeah.
like it's like a kid being told to eat their vegetables when saying, "Oh, I don't really like vegetables," but they eat it anyway because they do.
Yeah.
They
They've
just
had
eat
to.
it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Mm.
Yeah. And you look at where Formula One goes to nowadays. I mean, back in the 80s and 90s, when it was the traditional 16 races a season, you've mentioned we've got more now, which we do. It's 24 races in 2025, like it was in 2024. But soon Formula One will be going to places like Madrid. There's even been, talks. There was a formal submission of a bid for Formula One to go to Kigali in Rwanda as well. There's even a thing or two, or there's even been a few people within the motorsport community mentioning places like South Korea in Incheon. I think David Croft mentioned at the Autosport show when he was there. There's so many new places where Formula One could potentially be going to in the future, and it feels like we are losing more of the traditional race circuits like Spa. At the time of recording, recently there'd been the announcement that Spa will be rotating or alternating, let's say, on the Formula One calendar after 2027, and another track, Sanford, will be finishing its deal in 2026 and won't be hosting Formula One again for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think that's a real shame with Zandvoort. Um, it's a remarkably well organized Grand Prix, considering the difficulties they've got of getting everybody in by train. But I used the train last year, immediately after the race, and I was amazed at how easy it was. So, yes, just to go back to your original point, it is a real shame losing those places. Uh, Madrid, for example, I think will still be going to the Circuit de Catalunya. I'm pretty sure, and it'll probably be called the Catalonian Grand Prix because they are so proud of Catalonia. I've got a friend, neighbor, whose son lives in Barcelona, and they are so Catalonian based. They don't even like other people from Spain. So we're going to have I'm sure we'll have a Grand Prix of Catalonia. They've been doing a lot of work on that circuit as well. And so I'm sure we'll carry on going to the Circuit de Catalunya outside Barcelona, as well as Madrid. But it costs a lot of money to maintain a circuit to Grand Prix standards. And all the time you're being asked to change, and the traffic is difficult and everything like that. For example, two of the worst circuits for traffic are the Circuit de Catalunya and here in Europe anyway, and also Spa. And yet Spa are just about to spend 400 million euros, 40 million euros, sorry, 40 million euros
So
on their
400 was quite a lot,
yeah,
actually.
400 million is quite a lot on their new control tower. But actually, they need to work on the roads, the access roads in and out of the circuit. But having said that, they're still getting huge crowds there. Good for them. You know, I'm very pleased for them. I quite like going to Spa, but it's just getting in and out of the place that is so difficult. And of course, people love Spa. They love the countryside aspect of it. Well, I live in the countryside, and actually I quite like this countryside rather than all those pine trees you get at Spa. But that's nice for the Finns. That's why Kimi Räikkönen liked it so much. It made him feel like home.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love Spa. I love it as a race circuit.
Yeah.
I mean, what I will say is, though, when it comes to Spa, since it became the permanent home of the Belgian Grand Prix in 1985, there's only been two races that I would regard as classic races at that circuit. You could probably guess what the first one is going to be. Do you want me to tell you?
Yeah, go on.
1998. So that's the first one. The other one is when Michael Schumacher claimed his seventh and final Drivers' Championship in 2004. The reason why I would say those two races alone is because we had action all the way through and not just at one point in the race. That's why I don't include 2008, because in 2008, for the first 40 laps, we hardly saw anything. It was the last three or four where it very much came to life towards the end, because the rain came down and drivers were all over the place. Some were pitting in for intermediates, others just stayed on dries. That's maybe why people would put it out there as like one of the best races they've seen. But to me, it's not, because we didn't see action all the way through. Whereas in 2004 and in 1998, we pretty much did.
You can remind me, because you've got an encyclopedic brain, and mine gets lost in the hard drive. A race at Hockenheim in the wet when everyone was sliding off all over the place. Which race, which year was that? Because that is so memorable for me.
Was it 2000, the one where Rubens Barrichello won from 18th on the
Possibly.
grid? So was it that one you think?
Possibly. I mean, it was very, very wet. And from a professional point of view, we had an extraordinary situation where the crowd was seeing what we were meant to be talking about before we did, because it was all happening right in front of them. So they were going, ooh, ah, and we were saying, what's happening? What's happening? What's going on? It was just an extraordinary race from my point of view, from a professional point of view. You know, we're meant to tell them what's going on. They were telling us what was going on. It was extraordinary.
Well, I was thinking of a race in Hockenheim. We had 2018, which were changeable conditions then. That was the turning point where Vettel had gone off at the Sachs curve and Lewis Hamilton, who came through from 14th to win the race. And the following year in 2019, it was a wet race for the vast majority of it, and it dried out towards the end where Max Verstappen had won.
But Lewis didn't finish this one. The one I'm thinking of, Lewis went off at the penultimate corner.
Is that at... Ooh... It's a good question. Well, I was thinking Shanghai. I mean, Shanghai in China was one where he went off at the last, well, at pit entry, which cost him the championship. Is that the one you're thinking of?
No. It's definitely Hockenheim. Yeah, never mind.
Okay, we'll come back to that at another time, because otherwise we'll be spending all day thinking about which race it was. But the future of Formula One will go back onto. We've got a new team of Cadillac. You mentioned 22 cars initially, and then changed your number to 20, but it is going to be 22 in 2026 when Cadillac do eventually arrive. How bright is that for the future of motorsport and in Formula One? Because it's an American brand. I think there were sort of links with Andretti. I think there are links to Andretti somewhat. But General Motors are going to be putting together a new power unit for when they eventually arrive in 2028. But Cadillac will be using customer Ferrari engines for its first couple of seasons before General Motors arrive. But to see the expansion of the grid for the first time since when Haas came to the grid in 2016, I personally feel very, very happy about it, and I'm sure a lot of fans do. But from your side, considering you've seen a number of teams come and go within this sport due to financial reasons, how do you look at the situation of Cadillac arriving and what the future holds for the grid with there being two extra seats?
Well, first of all, I like to see a full grid. I like to have as many cars, not as possible. I wouldn't go up to say 30 cars like there is in Formula 3, but it's almost embarrassing that when I'm commentating at a Grand Prix, we've got 34 car Porsches, for example. We've got 30 Formula 3 cars. We've got 22 Formula 2 cars and only 20 Formula 1 cars. I liked it when there were 26. That was a good number from my point of view. I like 26 cars. Um, so I'm pleased to have Cadillac coming in. I just hope that it's a success because I wouldn't want it to be a failure. If it's a failure, from then on, nobody else is ever going to come in again. And that's a retrogressive step, if you like. I like to feel it's such an amazing amount of money for somebody to come in and huge investment. Um, I'm I'm looking forward to seeing them coming in, and I just hope it's going to be a success. I also worry a little bit about the fact that they've got a new sports car deal, of course, with the Jota team in the World Endurance Championship. So that's the only thing that I worry about it from that point of view. But I want it to be a success for them because it's hugely important for the success of Formula One as a whole that it is a success. Otherwise, it stays very much a closed shop because everybody else will say it's far too expensive. We can't make a success of it. Mm-hmm. So it's important. It's important. It's great to see. I'm glad another couple come in. I want them to be successful right from the word go. We know from Haas's cooperation with and collaboration with Ferrari that Ferrari provide a fantastic opportunity for new teams coming in. And look, Haas has done even better this last year, 7th in the Constructors' Championship, which was great, under Ayo Komatsu, which I'm very pleased about. And it's going to be interesting to see how Audi do as well when they complete their transformation from Sauber. So those are two things. It's really important those two manufacturers do succeed.
Mm-hmm. On 2025, we had 4 teams that won races in 2024. And not only that, all 4 of them achieving a 1-2 finish, which has never happened before in a Formula One season. We had 7 different drivers take multiple Grand Prix wins over the course of the year. That has never happened before. How do you see 2025 playing out? Not just in races, but in the championship as a whole. Are we going to be seeing multiple contenders fighting for the title?
I think we still will. We're still going to see Verstappen and Red Bull very competitive. We're still going to see 2 very competitive drivers at Ferrari. It's still going to be fascinating to see how competitive Lewis is going to be and what sort of effect that will have on Charles Leclerc. Whether we'll see 2 winners at Mercedes remains to be seen, I have to say. It's a big ask to suggest even that Kimi Antonelli is going to be a winner there. It's a big ask. We've already seen the effect of the pressure can have on Kimi Antonelli when he just crashed after what 7 laps at Monza. He is a newcomer. Okay, he's even now, I believe he's testing an old car at Jerez. So he's getting used to the cars, but there's so many other distractions, so many other things round about him. So it's going to be difficult for him to be a winner. McLaren, absolutely, they are going to be right on it. They're going to be right there. I'm absolutely certain of that. So both of those 2 could be winners. The only real question mark, I guess, is over Mercedes, but I'm absolutely certain George can be a winner again, George Russell. Kimi Antonelli, that's another question. Will we see a winner from another team? I think we could do. Just maybe one.
I was going to say Williams, with their lineup they've got now of Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz.
Yeah.
With the funding that Carlos Sainz brings over to the team, which can only help with the budget cap for them, because I think their budget cap is below what the regulation is anyway. So it can only be good news for Williams. You think about a team like Williams, who have been around since the mid-70s, have had very little success since their last championship in 1997. Can you see them getting back into the fray in a similar way to how McLaren have done it, now that they've got a real quality driver lineup, as though people say?
Yeah, I don't think you have to put too much emphasis on the drivers. It's the way the team is run. And James Vowles has come from Mercedes. It's taken him, it would normally take him a year or so to get his feet under the desk. And as we read this time last year, when he said that the processes, the systems at Williams really need updating. Well, now they're updated, and he will be taking that further and further in up the grid. I'm absolutely certain of it. It's going to be a difficult year. Obviously, it's not an easy year for anybody. Formula One isn't easy, but it's going to be a difficult year for those two, for Carlos Sainz. But I'm a big Carlos Sainz believer. I think I like the way his father operates. That will come down to the son as well. And I like the way that Carlos is quite a tough guy. You know, I really like that. He's not a soft touch at all. And you see that also with Fernando Alonso. He's the same. Is that a national trait? I don't know. But I like to see that. And I think you're right. I think they could well be possible winners. Aston Martin, not certain. There's a bit of a change of management there, a little bit of upheaval possibly. But otherwise, I think we've pretty much covered it. Will we see? No, I was going to say Haas, but no, that's too tough for a Haas. Maybe top tens, but yeah. And Sauber, literally, while we've been sitting here, we've learned that the team principal has left. I don't think that's any surprise, given that they have a new team principal with Mattia Binotto, but Aluni Bravi has left, and a nice guy, really good guy. Where else have we got? Of course,
we've got VCarb as well, who will be racing bulls, I think, in 2025. They've got Isaac Hadjar and Yuki Tsunoda, who's going into his fifth season with the team. You look at Tsunoda, how do you think he'll be feeling at this moment in time that the opportunity for him being in a Red Bull was just there, but due to contractual reasons, I would say, has prevented him, I think, from being in that seat, which it just feels a bit somewhat of injustice, really, because what more does he need to do?
I agree. But do you think it's still there? Do you think that opportunity is still there? I think it is.
Well, I'd like to think it is, but he can't stagnate within a team that isn't going places. He needs to get, if he feels that, you know, within 4 or 5 years that he's not going to be given an opportunity to be in that Red Bull seat, he needs to look elsewhere. I was thinking because of the Honda Works deal at Aston Martin. Logically, you would think that would be a better place for him. But then Aston Martin would have to get rid of one of their two drivers. I mean, we know Alonso's coming towards the end of his time in Formula One, so that may be what the team is thinking at this moment in time. But then you look at Lance Stroll, who has been under fire so much over the years since he arrived at the team formerly known as Racing Point. We know what Lance is capable of doing, but yet he hasn't shown it often enough compared to other drivers.
I think that's a pretty fair appraisal. We know what he's capable of. Yeah, I agree. I think Yuki Tsunoda, given another year with VCarb or whatever you want to call it, I think he's actually going to become a fairly valuable property. You know, he's going to have so much experience at the end of another year. He'll be a useful guy. I still think that opportunity is open for him at Red Bull. And I think elsewhere, if he puts in some good performances, people will see that actually he's there for the long term, the long run. He is a potential driver for any team in the future. So I think Yuki Tsunoda is a valuable guy. I think he will become more valuable with another season of experience.
And just looking at the other teams as well, we mentioned Williams, Aston Martin, Haas, Racing Bulls, and Sauber we mentioned there, who will become Audi in 2026. They've got Gabriel Bortoleto, who is one of, I would want to say 6 rookies rather than 5, because Liam Lawson is going into his first full season in Formula One. He's in a Red Bull. instead of what is now Racing Bulls. How do you look at Gabriel Bortoleto, Formula 2 champion, the new boys from Brazil? How is he going to fare and cope now that he's got the weight of Brazil presumably on his shoulders to excel in Formula One?
Well, if you think Formula 3 champion as well, not just Formula 2 champion. So he's been champion in both of those two. And I think he will really thrive. There'll be one or two mistakes, I think. I'm pretty sure there will be one or two mistakes. There'll be one or two accidents. But I think he will be pretty together. I think he's got quite a good head on his shoulders as well. He's taken the pressure in Formula 2 and Formula 3. He knows the pressure. He knows Formula 1. He's been at Aston Martin. He's come to lots of races. I don't think he's not a fragile commodity, if you like. One or two drivers I see as fragile commodities who haven't got the strength of character needed. I'm not going to put any names to that, but I don't think he's one of them. I think he'll be okay.
Another one is Isaac Hadjar, which fought for the title in Formula 2 with Bortoleto. A highly regarded chap. I even saw Hadjar in Milton Keynes for a charity event. I didn't get the chance to speak to him, but he seems at this moment in time content. But it's when he's in a racing car that's what's going to make the talking, isn't it?
I quite like Hadjar. I quite like his attitude. I like his background. His background. He talks about his family. They're professionals. They are people they're chemists. They're pharmaceuticals, whatever, things like that. And he is quite tough on himself. He's a bit like Jack Doohan was a couple of years ago, and I think Isaac Hadjar will be really, really quite hard on himself. You'll hear a lot of complaints of, oh gosh, why did I do this? Why did I do that? Sort of thing. I think you'll hear quite a lot of that. But he's a quick guy, and he has been a quick guy all the way through his various formulae, and I think he's worth having. And I'm glad he got the opportunity in F1.
We mentioned Kimi Antonelli as well. You've said that you're unsure whether he'll be a race winner this season, even in a top car like Mercedes, but we'll wait and see as the season goes on. I think with Antonelli, given the first 6 races to settle in, and then I think you'll start to see the Piastri-esque type driver where he can get podiums on a more regular basis, and then going into his sophomore campaign in 2026, we'll see more of the Antonelli that we all truly love. And you might end up with a race win at some stage. That'd be my prediction.
We haven't really seen very much of him, have we, this last year in Formula 2? You know, Prema did not star in Formula 2. Occasionally they were good. Prema were a disappointment in Formula 2 with both Ollie Behrman and Kimi Antonelli. They weren't good news. And so you would say that if they were relying on the Formula 2 results, those two wouldn't have got their drives. You actually have to go back to before the new car came in Formula 2 for Ollie Behrman, 2 years ago, for the 73 campaign, 23 campaign, for his successes then. And he was a success, fantastic young driver, a lovely young man as well. And to Kimi Antonelli, we didn't see him really, and we didn't see him in Formula 3 at all, and we haven't seen very much of him in Formula 2. He's a bit of an unknown.
A bit of an unknown entity to some people's eyes, but I kind of felt that way in a little bit with Lando Norris. Lando Norris had a very successful junior career up to Formula 1, but he's one of those who turns up and happens to be quick without really knowing why he's so quick. It's a bit like with Jim Clark. Like Jim Clark, who was a very shy, timid figure from Scotland, who just turns up at the racetrack and is just astonishingly quick. He was astonishingly, fantastically quick.
Yeah, No, I think that's a good analogy. I quite like that. And Lando, an interesting character. I think he needs a little bit more killer instinct. Particularly against Max Verstappen. It just needs with Max. You see the killer instinct. You see if you like, the ankle biting. He goes for it. He goes for it all the time. Whereas Lando is a bit more polite about it, shall we say? Um, and I think Lando just needs a bit more of that killer instinct. And I'm sure that's being is coming up in him as he sees the problems that he has with when he's up against Max Verstappen.
Two other drivers, Jack Doohan, who made his Formula One debut in Abu Dhabi when Esteban Ocon was relieved of his duties at Alpine to participate in the postseason test for Haas. Jack Doohan, a very mature Australian man, it has to be said. We saw him a lot on F1 TV when he was doing some work with the likes of Laura Winter, Will Buxton, and all that. How far of a Formula One career do you expect we're going to see of Jack? Because there had been news of Franco Colapinto being taken on as Alpine's reserve driver. You would think that's going to put enormous pressure on Jack to excel in the Alpine this year.
Well, I hope it doesn't because I'd like to see Jack excel. But in the past, Jack has been one of these guys who's had so much bad luck. And then it came all right for him in Formula Two a couple of years ago. And then he was hired by Alpine and spent last year studying Formula One and getting his feet under the table, as it were. And then making his debut at the end of a pretty low-key debut. And I'd like to see low-key for the next few races. The good news for him is once he's got the Australian Grand Prix out of the way, the pressure is off. There aren't any there's one Australian journalist maybe, and that's it. I mean, there's almost no pressure on him whatsoever from home, in spite of the fact Australians always expect everyone to win. And he's got his father, huge influence, a guy who knows all about winning, and his father is always there as support and always will be. And he's a guy who knows all about the pressure, knows all about what it takes. And that's why I think he needs just a settling in period, perhaps more than 6 races that you're going to give Kimi Antonelli, which I think is a bit parsimonious of you. I think you should give him a bit more than that, at least half a season, Kimi Antonelli. I think you're being a bit mean there.
Well, I think with Jack, I would say give him a whole season because I think traditionally now Formula One drivers are given a whole season to prove themselves, and if they're decent enough, then they'll get a contract renewal. I think he's only got a contract for this year. If he doesn't excel, then that's when you can put someone like Franco Colapinto in there because it's quite an expensive contract that they've signed him up for.
Yeah,
after
yeah.
all, Liam Lawson, who has only done 11 starts in Formula One, multiple race winner in Formula Two, race winner in Formula Three as well, I believe. A brilliant driver to have in a Red Bull, but has that opportunity been given to him too soon? Is what a lot of people will be thinking.
He's had 2-part seasons, hasn't he? For the last couple of years, he's shown to be good. He's shown to be pretty reliable. Perhaps having fewer accidents than Yuki Tsunoda, which could have been an important factor. It's going to be very interesting to see, actually, that Lawson versus Tsunoda and whether they've made the right choice. I look forward to hearing lots of words from Helmut Marko about that. I hope whoever's interviewing him consistently asks him, almost on a race by race basis, how do you think that is shaping up? I think that'll be quite a good subject to ask Helmut Marko. Put him on the spot all the time. But Liam is, yeah, he's done a good job. Not a lot of pressure on him from his nationality, from his country. I wouldn't have thought. We don't get a lot of New Zealand journalists at Grand Prix. In fact, I can count them on the fingers of one thumb, really. So it's going to be interesting to see if Liam Lawson lives up to the hype, he's just going to have to be naturally quick. And you were talking about Lando Norris being naturally quick. Liam Lawson is going to have to be naturally very quick to get anywhere near Max Verstappen. And we've seen how difficult that is with Sergio Perez.
Quick enough for Liam Lawson to win a race at least?
Don't know. Keeping my powder dry on that one.
We'll
I
wait and
don't know. I think it'll be very difficult. Not easy.
yeah, he'll probably have to do a repeat of what Ricciardo did with Vettel when he
Yeah,
arrived, knowing that Vettel was a four-time world champion. And Ricciardo, I wouldn't say wiped the floor, but he did beat him on merit.
yeah, true. And look what happened to Daniel. You know, that's a sad story, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Well, lots to look forward to. Lots of excitement coming. Um, and it all starts in just a few weeks' time, really, with the opening free practice or unofficial practice in Bahrain, and then the first Grand Prix at the start of March in Australia.
At the timing of recording, Bob, we had the Autosport International Show at the NEC, or the National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham in the UK. You were on the main stage to talk about the F1 cars that we have had over the years, given it's the 75th anniversary that Formula One will be celebrating this year. There were so many on showcase, including the Williams FW15, I think it was, or the FW14C, whatever the name was for Alan Prost's championship winning car. You had Damon Hill's Williams FW18. You've got Lewis Hamilton's 2009 McLaren. There were so many different cars on showcase. Which ones really stood out to you on the weekend?
Difficult to say, of course, as you mentioned, that Williams, the FW15C, was what perhaps the most advanced Formula One car ever. But I loved seeing them all, to be honest. Even though the fact that the Racing Point and the Force India were so huge in comparison. If you looked at Jaguar, the 2003, 2002 Jaguar, and then you went forward, say, 15 years or something, 2017, 2018 Racing Point, the difference in size was massive. Honestly, the whole, like the rest of the country, they put on weight hugely, and the size of them was enormous. It was really something to compare, to look at those two. Going earlier than that, I mean, I loved seeing a Lancia D50, for example, a very, very rare car. I think that's a recreation, actually. And the Maserati 250F was such a fantastic car. There were 26 of those made, a lot of them. And then there were some made up of spare parts later as well. So there were a lot of them around, but just great to see. And so all different of those Maseratis, that every single one was different. The little Cooper was great to see the difference, 8 inches lower sitting in the Cooper than it was sitting in the Maserati, for example. A change of regulations. And you just saw how the regulations had changed things. Sadly, we didn't really have anything from the late 60s there, which would have been a good illustration of when the DFV came in, for example, sponsorship came in, wings came in a big way. That was a major time for the Lotus 49, for example, round about that era with sponsorship and all those things. So we didn't have anything from there. The Lotus that we did have from the JPS era, the Essex era, wasn't a very successful one, but all the same, it was an important car to have there. All those cars had some sort of significance in some way. Even the last of the Shadows, the Shadow DN11, of the same era from 1980. Even the Alfa Romeo, to get an Alfa Romeo there was fantastic as well. Sadly, we didn't have a Ferrari, but there was a fantastic range of cars, and it was great to see it and wonderful to walk through. And to some extent, it was the story of my life,
And it was the story of my life as well for some of those machines because of the video gaming days that I had where there was the Jaguar R3, there was the Force India of 2009 as well. That was on showcase. Adrian Suter and Tony Liuzzi's names were on there, but one driver's name that wasn't on there that should have been was Giancarlo Fisichella, because he was the one who put that Force India on pole at Spa that year and got the team's only podium, or the team's first podium in Formula One since they took over from what was Spiker back in those days. But it was such a gorgeous set, because when I went the year before, there were literally only two cars of Formula One. I think it was an Alpine and a Haas that were there. And then, as you mentioned, I think there were 26.
22.
Was there 22? Was there? Okay. Well, I know that Ollie Behrman's car was there. I think it must have been last year's car with his car number on it. But it was still a phenomenal show, nevertheless, to see him there, his dad, his brother. And yeah, it was just a phenomenal occasion for him, because he used to go to the event when he was younger. But now to see him going into his first full season in Formula One, and to celebrate by being on the main stage with David Croft, it must have been brilliant for him.
I think he was. I think he had used the term overwhelmed. I think he was amazed, and at one point there was a queue waiting for his autograph, which was huge. I really felt sorry for him, because actually to sign so many autographs, I think would take him half the day. It was great to see him there. He's a good kid, good man.
A very good man indeed. Now, the Autosport show has been going on for many years now. I can't remember when the first one was, but we did have a hiatus during the pandemic, which meant it couldn't go ahead. But it's been around for the last few years now. What needs to happen for the event to keep on going in the long term? Because there have been mixed reviews about the event in terms of what's there and what needs to improve, to keep bringing the fans back. From your experience, what do you think needs to happen?
Well, it's difficult to say. I haven't been to the Autosport show for years. First time I've been for many, many years. I used to be the host on stage, and I wouldn't have a clue who was coming up. And I just literally, people would arrive and I'd say, "Hello, who are you? What do you do?" Literally, that was because I didn't know. I didn't know who it was. Anyway, it's quite difficult to engage the fans these days. How do you engage the fans? Obviously, social media is massively important. The old idea of a magazine is sadly redundant, it would seem. And I worked on Autosport, as we mentioned earlier on, and it's been a part of my life. I'm still a subscriber, but it becomes monthly this month, January. It's no longer a weekly magazine, which I find a shame, but things move on. How does one engage the fans? How does one inform the fans? How do you tell the fans that they've got to log on to xyx.com or whatever it is? So that's the important thing. If they really want to be kept up to date, you've got to tell them which website to go on. And there are a lot of websites out there, and some of them are producing absolute rubbish, and some of them are very good. And so you've got to work out which is which and which one to go on. Obviously, there is Autosport or motorsport.com or motorsportnetwork.com, motorsport.com. There's the race.com, etc. There's various websites to go on. They are hugely important in the ongoing development of Formula One, and they are accessible. Whereas a magazine like Autosport was accessible perhaps only here in the UK, something like that is accessible worldwide. If you're in Fiji, in the South Pacific, you can log on to therace.com any time of the day, and there'll be something there for you to read. So that's really, really important. What was the question again?
I think the question was, what needs to happen for the event to keep on going in the long term?
The event.
Yeah.
So the event. Well, the event is actually split now from the magazine anyway. It's no longer under the same ownership. I think it's still useful. There were certain things that were missing. There wasn't a lot of BTCC involvement, for example, British Touring Car involvement, or GT involvement. there were some great cars there, some fantastic cars. And I went to a couple of stands and I was really pleased to go to. And I nearly spent a lot of money at Sealy and bought some tools. Um, but it was a great opportunity to see those cars and to see those Formula One cars. My nephew actually organized all those cars, those 22 cars. And that's the business he's involved in. And he got them all together in a matter of weeks, actually, which was an accomplishment on its own. Some of them weren't necessarily all that significant or majorly significant. It wasn't as though they were major championship winners. That Williams that you mentioned, or the two Williamses that you mentioned, weren't necessarily, apart from that, there were other cars that were a bit mate weight, but still they were involved in Formula One. And that gives an illustration of what Formula One was about at that era. So difficult to say. You don't want it to become a museum, a temporary museum, but at the same time, it has to be a working exhibition, I think. And it's important that people are involved. The main stage gets them involved. And it'd be great to see it coming back into its former glory again as the Autosport show.
Yeah. And I love going to the event. I've been there for the last 3 years. And I think what makes me want to go to it is the fact that it's January, there's not a lot happening. The F1 season is not on at the moment. It's not on for like another couple of months. It's just a good weekend away. You know, if you've got your family with you and you've got a chance to see some cars whilst your kids have only just got back into school after the Christmas break, you know, what better day than take a visit to Autosport? Maybe what I would say is for the event to become cheaper, because what I think I did notice is that each category of ticket seems to have gone up in price from what it used to be. Maybe that's something that perhaps needs to be thought about for future events. That's maybe the one of the things I would say about it, because you want it to become accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
Because you know, everyone's got different jobs in terms of the amount of pay that they get. So you don't want the event to be too expensive. I know you said you don't want it to be a museum, but it needs to sort of become like a bit of a mix of exhibition, a live show event, a bit of engineering work that people can take a few things from that could help them in their careers. It just needs to have a bit of everything in there to make it value for money. That's the thing, value for money.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that. Would you agree with that?
I would certainly agree with that. I think it's important that people say, "Wow, I'm really pleased I've seen that." And I guess that's what that side of things, that the history of Formula One showed. It was important that those cars were there because that was something that perhaps they would only see at Silverstone in this country, or maybe Donington, the classic car shows. Some of those cars, the Alfa Romeo, I haven't seen since it was on. I don't know if it does demonstrations, but I don't think I've seen the Alfa Romeo for years, the 179C, things like that. So, yeah, I think that's an important part of it, that you'll see something different, something exclusive that you wouldn't have seen elsewhere.
And I would agree with that as well. Something that is quite rare for everyone to see that you
Mm.
may not have seen other motor museums like in Bewley, or even it's just a local sort of curators museum like the one in Bonn for BRM.
Mm.
That's another one that I've been to. Coming away from Autosport, let's talk about maybe what your sons do as well, like Ben and Max. Ben is a freelance commentator on the karting side of things. How has he been getting on throughout his career as well as Max?
Well, it was interesting. They both worked together um, about 20 years ago. And at that time, Ben was involved in world endurance, world touring cars, and world karting. And Max worked with him in world karting. And the two of them sort of split. And Max went off and worked for Williams for a couple of years. And then his girlfriend, now his wife, took him off to Australia, Perth, Western Australia. And that's where he is at the moment. And he's been organizing events down there, but not motorsport events. He's not really involved in motorsport any longer. Having said that, he follows it all the time. And I think he's still involved and in contact with some of his old colleagues from Williams at the time. We've all worked for Williams. My wife worked for Williams as well, and I've worked for Williams, and Ben's done a little bit for Williams as well. So we've all worked for Williams. We're all very much part of that team, and we have a loyalty to that team. Ben at that time was working with touring cars, etc. He's done a little bit with Formula E, not very much. He's done rallycross, he's done rally as well. He's finding it quite difficult. He lives in France, which is where his wife has a business as well in the French Alps. So it's a little bit difficult for him to get work. He's working in TV commentary with GTs, very much with SRO. He's organising the Race of Champions, which is this year's taking place in Sydney, the week before the Australian Grand Prix. And he's been asked to do some work with World Endurance as well. He's always looking for work. If you've got anything going, if anything's happening at FOM, let us know. He hoped to do something there. He'd love to do something more. In some ways, it's a bit of a problem. I'm the problem because our voices are very similar. And I always remember Jonathan Nicholas, who was our boss at FOM, and he's still my boss at FOM, saying, your voices are too similar. Like we can't have you working together because no one knows if it's you or your son. So really unfortunate. But he stood in for me at the Belgian Grand Prix last year. I couldn't go to the Belgian Grand Prix. And so Ben stood in for me at the Belgian Grand Prix. I think he quite enjoyed doing that. But I still want to carry on going to Grand Prix, thanks, Ben. So he's still got to try and find his own way. And he will. He'll find his own way. But it's kind of difficult. And it's quite difficult to do remotely, if you like, from the French Alps. It's quite difficult for him. But he wants to be involved. He's worked for Jordan. His gap year, you know how people have gap years after they leave school and go, well, his gap year was working for Jordan. And I would take him to Grand Prix, take him to Jordan, and he worked the weekend with Jordan Grand Prix. Then he also he did a certain amount of racing, a little bit of racing in all sorts of things. I think he did a Formula V race, but otherwise it was all sorts of funny things like Citroen C1s. He did those 24-hour races in the Citroen C1. And things like that. So he's got a little bit more experience. I've only done 2 races in my life, so he's got more experience than me. So one of them isn't involved in Formula One in motorsport at all. The other one is wants to be more involved, shall we say?
Well, I do wish them all the best, actually, because I've yet to meet Ben, because I know he's been heavily involved in the motorsport side of things. So if someone like myself or any of those that are watching, you know, who wants to get a career in motorsport, get the opportunity to meet Ben one day, then that would be fantastic.
Going on, if you were talking about exactly that. You were talking about getting involved in motorsport. I think it's important if you want to be involved in motorsport. I think it's important to be in motorsport, to be there in some form or other. And it was obviously very different when I started. But if I saw somebody now starting, I think the most important thing would be don't necessarily aim straight away at Formula One either. Formula One is obviously the peak. A lot of people go into Formula One and say, oh, I'm in Formula One, and very, very cocky about the whole thing. I think it's important to be in motorsport, and then you can always work your way up. I certainly worked my way up. I was the club editor of Autosport, and now I'm, being involved in Formula One. That's important. But to go straight in at Formula One level is pretty difficult. You may want to be involved in Formula One, but like everything else in life, you've probably got to work your way up. And that's the important thing.
I perfectly agree with that as well. I mean, I was lucky enough to be given my opportunities as a logger and researcher. And that I don't want to say it was purely down to my motorsport wisdom, but I think also the qualifications which you ideally need to be getting. Now, I came away with a bachelor's degree in media production and a master's in sports journalism. depending on the field of which you want to go into, whether it be journalism, stroke media, or whether it be engineering or mechanicking or PR or IT, what and you might have answered this question, but I'm trying to broaden this a little bit more. What would be your advice to those who are want to be going for opportunities within motorsport? Because, like you say, you need to try and start at the bottom. But would you say networking is the best way to go about it? Because the social media platforms that we've got now, you've got LinkedIn, which is the most designated place to network with individuals, but also other social media platforms, including Instagram, Twitter, Threads, you name it all.
I think networking is really, really important. And I think networking in person, if you possibly can, is really, really important. So again, you need to be there um, in person. You need to meet these people in person. It's not enough just to do it on social media, I don't think. I may be old-fashioned about that, and maybe things have overtaken me. I live in a little hamlet in the country. I'm just a country boy, really, and I don't understand these big city attitudes about these things. So, if you like, I may well be old-fashioned about it. But I think I think it's important the personal contact. And I look at that nephew of mine, Mark, and he has got to where he is, organising all those cars by the personal contact. And I saw him networking at the show and introducing himself to Ollie Berman, introducing himself to Tom Ingram, etc. Various people, David Croft, Jenny Gow, etc. And he made contacts, and those personal contacts are important. And I think you've got to show that you want to be a professional and you want to do it properly. And I think that's the important thing. And you've got a fantastic amount of knowledge, amazing knowledge up here. That is important as well. You can't come in and immediately be tripped up and realize by somebody who realizes you don't actually know anything at all. It's important you do know something. If you want to get involved in motorsport, you've got to have knowledge of motorsport. That's the important thing.
I couldn't agree more. And I would say, even if you don't get an opportunity, just go to events. You know,
Yeah.
go to a British touring car event, go to the Autosport shows, as we've mentioned, go to the Goodwood Festival of Speed. That's another event actually we've not really discussed on this show. The Goodwood Festival of Speed, which hasn't been around, which has been around since 1993. It did take a year off in 2020 because of the pandemic, but a brilliant event also for people to network. That because there's so many cars on showcase. You look at the people who are uh, standing at the stalls. They've got business cards. Go and get business cards from people because their contact
Mhm.
details will also be on there.
Yeah, absolutely. Goodwood is where I first saw my motor racing back in the early 50s, mid 50s. And it's about 15 minutes drive from here. And and when I took my kids to school, we used to go past the gates of Goodwood every single day. So that's it's Goodwood is part of my history, my heritage, and the events that they have there, people are very accessible. They're very easy to make contact with, and as you say, the Festival of Speed is very broad spectrum. And it's got the supercars there, it's got the historics, it's got modern cars, it's got modern rallying, modern Formula One. You've got the opportunity to make contacts there. You're absolutely right.
Absolutely, Bob. It's been a very long talk, but it's been a very quality one of you. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope to speak to each other again very, very soon.
Thank you, Tom. See you soon.
Thank you very much.